So I'm John Travis in Novato, California on the 20th of May, 2020, talking to Bill Manahan in suburban Minneapolis. The town again is?
St. Louis Park.
Ah, yes, St. Louis Park up there by that beautiful lake. And we're re-recording this session because we had bad audio from a great session, and now we're having to use your phone. So it may look a little weird on the recording with the three-way connection, but we're going to go for it, Bill. Let's again find out who you are and why. And you can lower the phone a little bit so you don't look so much like a radio announcer. We have persisted. This is our third effort to get this recording. It was so good the first time, except for the dropout, that I just couldn't do without it. So let's start again with where you were born, you grew up, and your early family life and influences that led you into medicine.
I was born in Medelia, Minnesota, a town of 2,000, 1940. World War II was just starting. So it was an interesting time to come into the world. And now right in the time of the pandemic, another huge world event. Yeah. Anyway, I was the middle of 5 children. My dad was an attorney in town, the only attorney. And my mother was the first woman newspaper editor in a small town, Minnesota. Her father had run the newspaper and he got ill, and she came back from college to help for a little bit, and he never came back, and she stayed there for the next 40 years being the editor of the Medelia Times Messenger. So it was an interesting family to grow up with. And I then went to college at the University of Minnesota. I majored in English and then went into medical school at the University of Minnesota and did an internship in Santa Barbara, California, a rotating internship, as people did in the 60s. Yeah. Everybody did a year's internship and then decided whether they were going to be a GP, general practitioner, or whether they were going to go into a specialty like internal medicine, pediatrics, or surgery or psychiatry. And at that point, Diane and I, my wife and I, went in the Peace Corps after internship, and we were 2 years in Malaysia. I worked at an Aborigine hospital just outside Kuala Lumpur. And then we transferred after 2 years and went to Ghana, Accra, Ghana for a year. And I did all public health that year and setting up a malaria eradication and tuberculosis control program in Ghana, working with the Ministry of Health in Ghana. So those were 3 great years. And during that time, family medicine started as a specialty. And so when I came back, there were 8 family medicine residencies in the United States. I think there's 300 or 400 now, but at that point there were 8. And I picked the Oklahoma City, University of Oklahoma Family Medicine Residency, which happened to be started by a pediatrician from Minneapolis. It was a strange thing that happened. But that was a great residency. And I then went on faculty there of our program after I finished the 2 years of residency. And then we were back at a Christmas back in Minnesota. And I had a couple of my 4 boys were starting school in Oklahoma City. And we lived in an integrated neighborhood, but all the white people sent their kids to private schools. And our sons were the only white people in the entire public school that they were going to. And it was tough for them. And we came back at Christmas to be with family in Mankato, Minnesota. And it turned out that my brother's kids were at a sort of a Summerhill type of school. It was a very open type of school, great education. And so it took us about half an hour to make a decision. We had planned to stay in Oklahoma City. We loved it there, but if you've got kids, you know how important education is, and we did not believe that the private school system should exist. We were big public school people, and so we ended up coming back to Mankato and going to this public school that was experimenting with some open education. And that brought us to Mankato, and that's where I was for 30 years, being a family doctor in Mankato, Minnesota. a town in south central Minnesota.
Right. A little more detail on your early life with your siblings. It's interesting how many of the docs I've interviewed were middle children. It's surprising. But as a middle child, what were the other siblings? Boys, girls, and how did you relate to them and so forth?
Yes, I had a brother 4 years older, and he became a lawyer like our dad. And then I had an older sister who was 3 years older, and she became a nurse and then a mental health nurse called a CNS, certified nurse specialist, which is a mental health nurse practitioner. And then me, and then I had two younger sisters, one who was, 6 years younger, and one who was 10 years younger.
What a
And
spread. Wow.
yeah, it was from 1936 to a 14-year spread with the five of us.
Uh-huh. And what was your earliest recollection of interest in medicine?
Well, that's an interesting story, Jack. When I went to college, I decided I was going to be a coach and a teacher. I did a lot of athletics in high school, and I especially wanted to coach basketball, baseball, or track, or even football, all of which I did in high school. But in the second year of undergraduate work, I realized that I was going to major in math and be a math teacher, but I realized I didn't like, as it got into higher types of math, I didn't realize I didn't like it as well as I had thought I did. So I went to a job counselor at the college, and he gave me a test. And I can't remember if that afternoon or if I came back the next day to look at the results of the test. And number one, the test results, number one would be that I would be be a farmer. And number three was to be a rancher. And number 8 was to be a physician. Those are the only three I remember. And I looked at it, and I'm with the counselor now and at the college. And I said, I think I'll be a physician. And he says, well, that's number 8 on here. Why are you, you look farmer and rancher. And I said, well, I've worked a lot on farms. And last summer, I said I worked a whole summer on the ranch in Montana. And I really love that. But I think a physician would be more fun. He said, well, have you ever thought of that? I said, no, I've never thought of it. Well, do you have, are your siblings or people in your family? No, I don't have any physicians in the family. And but I did learn over time that that's how I tend to make decisions quite quickly. And the second thing was I realized later on that one of my key peak experiences was about age 4 or 5. I was very sick. And I was in my bed, high fever, and the doctor in our town, the one doctor, made a house call, sat by the bed, held my hand, checked me over, and that night I slept, and I got up the next morning, and I was well. And that flashed back to me that I'd never thought of it, but it's like he had healed me just by coming to my house, and I don't even know if he gave me any treatment or not. And so that may have been, that one house visit he made may have been instrumental in getting me into medicine. It had never crossed my mind to be a doctor.
And not only that, but knowing the type of medicine you practiced and your values, it had even more influence of the personal connection.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This guy was a major role model.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah. And now, I remember you're saying things about your experience in Ghana, and it was quite unusual what you were charged with doing, and tell us more about that.
Yeah, my first 2 years in Peace Corps were in Malaysia, and I spent half time out at an Aborigine hospital just taking care of patients. The other half time was being a doctor on site for Peace Corps volunteers. There were like 300 or 400 Peace Corps volunteers in Malaysia. Parents were struggling allowing their kids to go overseas because worried about medical stuff. So that was when Sarge Shriver and Jack Kennedy had the idea to get a doctor in American doctor in every country. And they could do you know, have to do volunteer work like a Peace Corps volunteer, but they also could be there to take care of the Peace Corps volunteers. And so that was a great stroke of luck, because then parents said, okay, we'll send our kid if there's an American doctor over there. And so I did that for 2 years, and then I got fascinated with there was an American doctor in Malaysia who had been setting up malaria eradication and TB control programs. And I would work with him, and I became sort of fascinated in what he was doing, because it just made a lot of sense. Half the time I would be out there treating people with tuberculosis and malaria. And here he was doing a program that already had been there 2 years, had started to dramatically decrease the incidence of tuberculosis and malaria. And it went, it sort of pre-shadowed my whole career, was asking people, why do you think your body is doing this? And can we go upstream and figure out what the cause is rather than just treating it? And so it hit me at a very core level of who I am, wanting to figure out the why rather than the what. It's easy to make a diagnosis, but it's not easy to say the why. Why does this person have this problem? And so that sort of marked my practice all through the years, and wanted me to become more holistic and integrative and alternative, because when my patients would come into my practice, I wanted to say, well, I wonder why you've had headaches for 4 months instead of 4 years. What happened 4 months ago? Or a skin rash, anything. So anyway, I stayed. That's why I transferred to Ghana for a year. I got so excited about doing public health. And so I wrote to Peace Corps and asked if they had any countries they were going to do malaria eradication or tuberculosis control. And in fact, they were in Ghana. So they had me go to Ghana. And that whole year, I didn't see any patients. If a Peace Corps volunteer got sick, I might see them. But Ghana had a pretty advanced medical system, so they could see Ghanaian doctors. But I worked all year with the public health people and helped them set up their malaria eradication TB control program. So that was really exciting to me. And I might have gone into public health, but at that same time during that year, the Academy of General Practice wrote to me and said, we're starting this specialty called family medicine. And the GP we decided needs more education. So instead of 1 year of internship to be a GP, we're now doing 3 years. 1 year GP of internship and then 2 years of family medicine residency. Mm-hmm. Well, I immediately knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I knew I needed more training. Even though I'd been out now for 3 years from internship, I still just knew I wanted more training to be a doc. And so that's when we came back and lived in Oklahoma City for 2 or 3 years. Then I did the residency and then moved to Mankato.
The specifics of the malaria and TB eradication, I'm assuming standard public health measures of clean water and so forth, but what more can you say about what you were instituting in Ghana?
You know, it's interesting you asked that, because I've almost forgotten, but now during this public health crisis called a COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the public health stuff has come back, and and there, of course, one of the key things was contact tracing. If someone has TB, then you go to the family and friends and you do a Manto test to see if they have tuberculosis. And if you catch it easily, then you can treat them with isoniazid or INH, with medication before they even get sick or get the problem. And malaria, it was before thinking of hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine. I think, that's gotten so much publicity now during this time. Well, that's what we used for malaria then. And it was an excellent drug, but whether it should be used during the COVID-19 is a whole nother thing. Malaria eradication was what you said. It was getting rid of, trying to figure out how we decrease water that sits around, decrease mosquito population, do the things, find the vectors and find the causes of where high incidence of malaria were, do case tracing, and then try and get rid of or eliminate or lessen the mosquito load in those areas, netting around beds at night, things like, because they tend to come out at night, different things like that.
And was a part of it educating the populace, like to understand how mosquitoes breed and keep the water, stagnant water levels down as through their efforts as well?
Yeah, it was a nice system there. They had 8 public health offices in the 8 districts of Ghana. I think there were 8. And you know, so it was, I worked with all 8 of them. I would travel around and spend a couple days and try to just bring the best of what Peace Corps had to offer for information, and doing all those different things and in the 8 different districts. And it was the Ministry of Health had the central core, but then the power was given to each district and the workers, the Ghanaian workers in each district, to implement what they had recommended. So it was an interesting year for me, and it helped me realize that I didn't want to go into public health. And the reason is because, you know, we were going to have a meeting at 9 o'clock with the 3 public health people in one of the districts, and they would pull in about quarter to 10 or 10, and then the meeting would drag on for 3 hours. And I realized my personality is not to sit in meetings and doing a lot of consensus decision making. I like to make decisions quickly and myself, and that makes for a good family doc or GP. You know, you're just, so I ended up not going into preventive medicine, public health, and going into family medicine. So that was a really good year for me to realize, oh, I hate meetings. I'm not a meeting person.
You're a frontline kind of guy.
Frontline kind of guy. And when I mentor college students who are wondering, should I be a nurse or a doctor or a chiropractor or a naturopath or that type of thing, you know, public health, you know, it's been very helpful, because I say, well, what kind of person are you? What, you know, do you like to have consensus and process things out, or are you a pretty quick decision maker, or, you know, those kind of things? Because it's important to find the right area that fits with one's personality.
Yeah, for sure. And any more specifics on your residency in Oklahoma City? That what came to you from that that influenced your later practice?
Well, the residency, I picked it. There were 8 residencies at that time in the United States in family medicine, and when I read through the 8 of them, this one it said something like, there's a huge emphasis on outpatient care of patients. Mm-hmm. And I knew from my internship and being in medical school that what I liked was the outpatient care of patients, the continuity of care. You know, it was okay to be in a hospital and do some things there, but I liked the continuity of care and getting to know my patients better. Mm-hmm. And so the Oklahoma City program was a huge amount of seeing patients in a clinic and not being in the hospital and not having to do a lot of hospital rotations. So that's why I picked Oklahoma City, and I thought it was a fabulous residency. And as I said, Roger Linke had been a pediatrician here in the Twin Cities, but it was the days where specialty people often did everything. Surgeons were very often a GP, because they would go to a town trained as a surgeon, but there wasn't nearly enough work to do as a surgeon, so they would do general practice also. And pediatricians often took care of families, because yes, they were trained as a pediatrician, but they had a year of internship, so they were a GP also. And so they had GP plus a couple years of pediatric training, and so they often did general practice. And Roger Linke was one of those people. He was a great general practitioner also. And so it was an excellent program. I really liked it. And but ended up coming back to Minnesota because of the school system, and ended up being in family medicine, then in general practice in Mankato for 30 years.
And now that practice, did you start out solo or join a group, or how did you start up?
Well, it's interesting. The first year I got there, I didn't even have a job. I just moved there, and then someone said, well, the college, Mankato State University, is looking for a doctor. And so I went up there, and they said, great, we were looking for somebody. And so I worked the year up at Mankato State University, which is a college of, 15,000 people at that point, I think. So it's a big university.
Wow.
Maybe 10,000, but 10 to 15,000. And I really liked it. But during that year, over a 2 or 3 week Christmas break, the Mankato Clinic, which at that point was, I think, 16 doctors, asked me if I would come and fill in for some doctors who were going to be gone. And I went over there and worked for 2 or 3 weeks during Christmas vacation. And then they asked me to come on their faculty and be there. And so be on their staff. Well, I said, I don't want to be in this clinic because there's no family doctors. There were only pediatricians, internists, and surgeons at that point. Family medicine didn't exist yet. I was in the first family medicine class, and the general practitioners in town each had a solo practice, which was pretty common then. There were maybe 6 GPs in town, and each of them had a solo practice. And the Mankato Clinic just had pediatricians, internists, and surgeons. I said, I don't want to come into a clinic where they don't even know what a family doctor is and, that kind of thing, and just see sort of the leftovers from you. Well, the business manager at that time had the sense to, he said, well, let me think about it. A day later, he said, well, why don't we, they were on the edge of town, the clinic, and they said, we've been thinking of putting a clinic downtown. Why don't we go downtown Mankato and put you in there by yourself? And I said, that'd be great. I would like that. And so I started basically in my own practice, but part of the Mankato Clinic, part of a system. Mm-hmm. And then a year later, I got another person. The 2 of us worked there for quite a while, just as part of the Mankato Clinic. And then after certain years, they started the clinic. It was the start of where big clinics started being run by business people rather than by doctors. And so they started looking at production and things like that. And both my partner and I said, we want to see patients in the way we want to see them. We're not going to see a patient every 15 minutes. We like to take our time with them. And and so he started another clinic, and then I started another clinic on myself. So we left the Mankato Clinic, started our own clinic, and then each of us we remained good friends. And he got a partner and I got a partner. So we were an independent practice then for a long time, just as 2-person practices. So that's sort of my story in Mankato. I was there 30 years.
How did the existing solo GPs respond to you? First of all, competing with them through the clinic, and was there plenty to go around, or were there any political repercussions from family medicine arriving in Mankato?
That's a good question. If I had to report on it, I would say we got along great. That there were plenty of patients to go around, and the general practitioners, didn't feel threatened by us as far as I know. The other side of that story might be I'm sometimes oblivious to what's going on. And a couple of times I heard from one of the guys that, but no, in general, we got along pretty well. It was the days when a town like Mankato, a town of 30,000, had county medical society meetings every month, and we ate dinner and then would have a program. And so it's like the doctors really communicated. We really knew each other, and we all had patients in the hospital all the time. And so I would make rounds, and then I would go into the doctor lounge before I went back to my office and have a cup of coffee and sit and talk to the other surgeons or internists or pediatricians or the other general practitioners who were in there. It was a very different day. If there were 35 doctors and then soon 45 in town, they were good friends. We knew everybody really well. The doctors really knew each other. And so if I went out of town, it would be easy for me to say to one of the solo practitioners, would you handle my patients for a week? I'm going to be gone. And they would say, sure. And I would handle their patients. And so overall, I would say we got along very well. There was, and it was sort of it was the perfect days of medicine, because those of us who don't want to be told what to do, we're all in independent 1 or 2 person practices. And those who don't mind being told what to do and don't want to have anything to do with running the business of medicine were part of the Mankato Clinic. So it was like there were 60 doctors in town by later on. So there were 30 in the Mankato Clinic and 30 who were independent. Mm-hmm. And then gradually that changed, that all the independents got eaten up or bought out or joined the clinic, or the insurance system became more difficult. Everything became more difficult to be in a solo or a practice. And so at this point, there's probably an ophthalmologist and a dermatologist and a urologist independent of Mankato, and everybody else. There's 70, 80 doctors, and they're all part of the Mankato Clinic. And that's sort of that's a microcosm of what's happened in every city in America.
Wow.
It's very, until just the last 5 or 10 years, some of the family docs and others, especially in functional holistic integrative medicine, have started to go out on their own and often a cash practice and not even taking insurance. So it's during these 50 years, Jack, it's really been interesting, the incredible changes that have happened in medicine from what it was back in 1970. Yeah, it's been 50 years, right down the button almost.
Yeah, it's reminding me that my dad's practice in Bluffton, Ohio, where there were 2.5 doctors, because there was usually the third doctor was semi-retiring, and they had a 19-bed hospital. One of my dad's patients was Phyllis Diller, who was a friend of my mother's. She came back to had her hysterectomy at Bluffton Hospital. My dad charged $1 an office call until I was in college in the early 60s, and he doubled it to $2 a visit, dispensed his own medicines. And I think there must have been some primitive insurance, but it wasn't a big part of it, and certainly didn't control the operation. So it's really interesting how we're coming full circle to, as I was in training, HMOs were the new thing of organizing, and instead of private clinics, they were all the advantages of having a big system that could meet everybody's needs. But then the businessmen and the 15-minute visits and all of the restrictions that have stifled medicine, and doing the same thing in the teaching arena. My partner is a teacher. And now, holistic medicine, really integrative medicine, is a response to the loss of what my dad's practice was and what you started out with. And, it's a cycle, the wheel turning. But what's also interesting is that you help me see that usually when we talk about integrative holistic medicine, it's about the treatment, but what you're really talking about is the upstream piece. That's where I think you're most articulate from. I remember from our first interview of in wellness, we look at what's upstream, and so rarely is that done. And it's not controversial, you can't fault it. It's so plain and obvious, and yet rarely does that get emphasized when you're talking about integrative holistic practices. And that's why I wanted to get this interview down pat, because you speak so well to that. So let's go into when you first got connected with American Holistic Medical Association and involvement with that, and then working with medical students and that whole part of your career, as you told me before.
Well, let me go back first and just finish up what we were just talking about. And yes, it's why I loved your stuff and what you were doing with wellness, because that's the normal human condition. So the question always is, why did I or my patient leave? And when I read the Journal of the Academy of Family Practice now, I just am continually so sad. I think a week ago I read the most recent one came out, and they have an article on atopic dermatitis, and I go through the whole article, and there's nothing about going upstream to say it's all about treatment. How do you treat this problem of atopic dermatitis? Mm-hmm. And it just is like, how is this possible in 2020? The wonderful American Academy puts out a 5-page journal article on atopic dermatitis and has almost nothing. There's not one word in there about diet or nutrition. And the fact that certain foods cause atopic dermatitis. And it's like they don't know that yet, or they've never, how is it possible? Or that stress, or that the bed sheets that they're writing, or the laundry detergent they're using. There's nothing in there about that. It just goes through 4 pages of how to treat it. And there I don't recall because I couldn't stand to read the article, so I skipped over some of it. But nothing about stress, nothing about the lifestyle, nothing about anything.
Yeah.
And so it's astounding what's still happening in that, and it's why those of us like Vic Serpina and all of us, why we knew your stuff so well, Jack, because we were immediately attracted to it, because it's basically the brother sister of holistic medicine, of functional medicine. It's going upstream and talking about what were you like when you were well, and what did your body and this wisdom trying to tell you by getting sick. And it was as simple as that. It's like the body's our friend, it's our ally, not our enemy. And so there's a reason your body is getting atopic dermatitis or bladder infections or pneumonia or sinus problems or asthma. And our job is not just to treat it, it's to help you in combo, in tandem here, figure out what is your body and its wisdom trying to tell you. And that's the biggest thing missing in medicine, I think. And it's why there's this big shift of people being fascinated with functional medicine, because that's what functional medicine basically is. It's going upstream to say, what is your lifestyle? What is your environment? What are your genetics? And those things put together is basically how we function. And it's sort of the whole thing can be put down in conventional Western medicine. What we say is, what's wrong? We make a diagnosis, and you were trained the same way. Everything was the diagnosis, and then treatment just went off of that. In functional, integrative, holistic medicine, it's much more why. Why is this happening? And the diagnosis is nice to make sometimes. See, and that's what I always say, it's the difference between acute and chronic care medicine, or what is better called fast medicine and slow medicine. Mm-hmm. In fast medicine and in acute care medicine, everything is based on the diagnosis. What's wrong? Do you have a pulmonary embolus? Do you have a heart attack? Do you have a broken femur? It's really important to make the diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And why that happened isn't very important. It might be down the road, and what happened was we took fast medicine, acute care medicine, which we do so beautifully, and we moved that model into chronic care medicine. Mm-hmm. And that's the key thing wrong with medicine today. And that's why chiropractors and naturopaths and all these other disciplines are looking at Western medicine and saying, you guys have lost your way and you don't know what you're doing out there, and you better let us do it. And in fact, in my experience in Minnesota, the chiropractors, the naturopaths, the psychologists, they're doing a much better job of treating chronic problems than my conventional allopathic medicine doctors are. Mm-hmm. Because they're still like depression. They make the diagnosis of depression, and then they put a person on SSRI. And if they're good, they might check out thyroid, but they don't check out adrenal function. They don't really get much, they don't really do much except figure out what's wrong and treat with a pharmaceutical. And in my opinion, about 70% of the time, that's probably what I would call malpractice. I hate to be harsh with my colleagues, but the fact is, it's sort of like the article I just mentioned. How can you have a 5-page article on atopic dermatitis and not start asking, why does this person have it? And I could go through there every month with the same thing, and whether it's asthma or allergies or bladder infections, it's just basically, here's what it is, and here's how we treat it. And we, as a discipline, I love family medicine, and Western medicine and conventional allopathic medicine, but we have suffered from having too much power and not being willing to change course and realize that, the best of Western medicine is acute care medicine. It's what we do with really bad problems. And what we do with chronic things, we don't do very well. And I will say, I'm finishing up here my long diatribe, the middle ground is things we can measure. And so we do very well with hypertension because we can measure it. And that's a slow medicine, that's a chronic problem, but we can show that, we get hypertension, and then we put persons on medicines, and then we lower their blood pressure, and that helps them from getting heart disease. So that seems like a good thing, but even that, where we do a good job, I would say what we really need to do is, why do people have hypertension and type 2 diabetes? And if we really look at that and take a holistic approach, I've seen some studies where like 60 or 70% of people can eliminate their type 2 diabetes and hypertension by changing lifestyle and doing what you started preaching 50 years ago, doing wellness. You see, so the circle comes around to that you are way ahead of us in talking about wellness, because that's all it is. It's like, and see, my thing with my patients always, and when I'm teaching students, I would always go, what is the body in its wisdom trying to tell you? And two of the easiest ones to talk about are type 2 diabetes and hypertension, because almost always it's lack of exercise, it's stress in their job, it's a bad diet, it's overweight, it's the type of things that are causing those two illnesses to happen. And if you can help people and get a team to motivate them and work with them, 60, 70, 80% of them won't have those problems. It's just their body trying to tell them they need to change their lifestyle or environment. And that's why functional medicine is so important. Functional medicine, all it is looking at the environment. You can't stand your job, or you're working in a lead factory and you're having lead poisoning, or any of that. And it's looking at your lifestyle. You're not exercising, you're eating terribly, you're in stress, and it's looking at your genetics. And that's going upstream. Functional medicine is not just about giving a bunch of supplements. Functional medicine is going to the core of what we need to do as practitioners to get to help patients figure out what is their body and its wisdom trying to tell them. And I want to start a medical school. And then when I was talking to a naturopath about this, and she looked at me after I'd rattled on for 15 minutes and said, Bill, that's what naturopathy is. That was my 4 years of training. And I went, whoops, sorry, you're right. It was most humbling. It was suddenly, yes, that's a lot of what chiropractors are helping. Chiropractors, if the good ones, when they're out in practice for a while, they realize that manipulation and cracking the bones do not help a lot of people. So they're some of the biggest people who have gone into functional medicine and a more holistic approach. So in Minnesota now, we have some fabulous chiropractors who are, not what we thought of 30 years ago as chiropractors. They're doing functional medicine.
Yeah.
And yes, they adjust the body and help the body adjust, but they also will help change doses of vitamins and minerals and check out thyroid function. And they're doing a really great job, a lot of them.
I think one of your most important contributions, for me anyway, is the distinction between fast medicine and slow medicine. That I've only heard that from you, and it's so crucial to sorting out the dichotomy of what often feels like a conflict for people. Well, they identify with the fast medicine successes and don't get the slow medicine inappropriateness of the allopathic model. So I wish your distinction were much more widespread. It's so beautifully simple and powerful. So thank you for that. Also, let's move into historic.
Wait, before you say that, let me just say there's a book written called Fast Medicine or Slow Medicine. I can't remember. But I can't remember the name of the author. She's in San Francisco, and she really lays out what I just said in a beautiful way.
That's right. I think it was slow medicine. I remember now from our previous interview. So then you intuitively recognized this from your own experience, and eventually, like Norm Shealy and Gladys McGarry, started the American Holistic Medical Association, and started banding together people like you that had figured this out, and you became involved, and then eventually the president after I had left. But that's how I first knew of you. I think we corresponded back in the 80s. And so how did you discover that bunch and get involved?
Well, it's a nice story, and like many good things in my life, my wife, who died in 2001, she brought me a little folder from a nursing thing. She was a nurse, a mental health nurse. And she said, look, over in La Crosse, Wisconsin, they're going to have what's called the American Holistic Medical Association meeting. And I said, what's holistic medicine? And so she's reading off this little brochure, what holistic medicine is. And I said, wow, that does sound good. And so living in Mankato, we were only 3 hours away from La Crosse, Wisconsin. And now you might ask why the American Holistic Medical Association would start in La Crosse, Wisconsin. It started in 1978, and this was 1979. It was 1 year, the second year they were having it.
Mhm.
And the answer is because Norm Shealy was a neurosurgeon in La Crosse. Norm Shealy, who's written 35 books, has published 300 papers, has 14 patent inventions. Anyway, he combined with Gladys McGarry from Arizona, who is now 99 this year and still seeing patients, and also a doctor from California. And the three of them somehow got together. They had met at a meeting or something and formed the American Holistic Medical Association. So this was 1979 now, a year later. So Diane and I signed up and we drive over to the meeting, and it's like, it's like that feeling of coming home, of finding your tribe, of, oh, here's my people. I'll never forget it. It was one of the big experiences of my life because we both just love the talks and love the people. And that's how I got involved very early in it. And it was maybe a year or two later, every year then they would have a meeting of the membership during the 4-day conference. And it was at that conference, like 3 years later, that I raised the question. The board, the 10-person board would sit up in front of the auditorium, and then the 100 people, 100 docs, it was only for doctors then, and the 100 docs and a few nurses would just, ask questions, and they would have a meeting and that kind of thing. Well, I raised my hand and said, is this just for doctors? Why don't we allow nurses and naturopaths and chiropractors and others all to be part of this holistic group? Holistic means whole, and we should, all the healthcare practitioners. And the answer at that time was, well, it's just for doctors, and that we need to have our own place. And afterwards, Jim Gordon, do you know that name, Jim Gordon?
Oh, yeah, I interviewed him last week.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jim Gordon was on the board, and he came down afterwards and said, Bill, I really like what you're saying, but I'm the only one on the board who does it. Why don't you be on the board and join me? And then we'd have two of us on the board who think it should be for more than all just doctors. And I said, okay. So that's how I got on the board at a very early stage in like the early 80s. And by 1988, after 6-7 years on the board, I became president. And that's this great story, Jack, of where it's a 2-year term to be president. And so in that first year we were then a 14-person board. I got all 14 members to agree on the board to have it open to all healthcare practitioners. So I was so proud of myself, and I sent out a letter to the membership saying, here's the why. We've talked about this. We've had 4 meetings about it because we met quarterly. And the board has decided, and we just need your stamp of approval, da-da-da-da-da. Well, 70% of the people voted against doing it. I learned a good lesson of how to not bring the troops along when you're a general.
Now, we're most
and
of
it
them,
took from, pardon?
We're most of them docs, and that's why they were afraid. Yeah.
At that point, it was still all doctors, and so it was like still that sort of classification of well, everybody else is different from me, and they don't,
the gods.
I don't know what it was, but anyway, so interestingly, that was about 92, 94, and it took until 2015. Another over 20 more years before we disbanded the American Holistic Medical Association and started the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, which was then open to all practitioners. And AIHM now is doing great and thriving with open to all practitioners interested in this.
Right. So you've seen it from the beginning through the current status, like 30 some years, 40 years. Yeah. 79 to
1978. Right.
Yeah. I was at the 1978 meeting, but I couldn't afford the dues because my wellness practice didn't generate much income, and so I followed along at a distance, and I did go to the 1990 meeting in Seattle and met Chris Northrup there, and I know when I interviewed Bethany Hayes, her description of finding the AHMA was like finding her tribe, and for so many of you. And now there's a whole new generation, many of whom I've interviewed in the last week, thanks to you for helping me track them down. So I think that's pretty well documented. Then there's the medical student program that you have such a big role in, and tell me how that originated and your experience with med students in the summer.
I can't remember what year that was, but it was in the late 90s. And we were once or twice a year taking a Thursday through Sunday and going to a medical school, medical campus, and putting on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning program for the medical students on holistic medicine. And after about our second year of that, and Wendy Kohatsu was part of that, and Polly Delavitt, who was not a physician or nurse, but just a health educator, and a couple other people. And one of them was the dean of the University of Florida Medical School, and I'm forgetting his name. But anyway, after about the second or third year of doing this, we sat one time afterwards. It was like Sunday afternoon, and we'd finished. We were all going home back to our practices. And we sat around saying, this was the most fun thing we did. We loved doing it because the medical students who came got excited about it, and we loved sharing our stories with each other and hearing each other talk. And it was such a hands-on small group of people. And so I can't remember who of us said it, but we said, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this for 3 or 4 weeks instead of a 3-day thing? Because in their fourth year, medical students have these 3 and 4 week rotations. You know, it's sort of what the fourth year of medical school is. All it is rotations to different things they want to do. And so that's how we started what was called LIGHT at first, L-I-G-H-T, and I can't remember the acronym, what it stood for. But after a year or two of that, we changed it to HEART, H-E-A-R-T-I-M, Humanistic Elective in Activism and Reflective Transformation with Integrative Medicine. HEART-I-M, H-E-A-R-T-I-M, Humanistic Elective in Activism and Reflective Transformation with Integrative Medicine. And so it started the HEART program.
Creating that acronym, that was a major, probably took a week to come up with all that.
I take no credit for that. I can't remember who did it, but to call it HEART because it was such a heart-centered program. Yeah. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And integrative medicine was just started. The word integrative medicine was barely starting at that time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it might have been called HEART at first, and then we added the HEART-I-M when integrative medicine became the name for holistic medicine. HEART-I-M. Anyway, I can't remember, but we got someone knew about IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, in Petaluma, California, just north of San Francisco. And that was fabulous. It's a beautiful place, and their whole purpose, that was started by Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, who was looking at noetic, which means intuitive knowing. And so the Institute of Noetic Sciences, they did research there in intuitive knowing. And so it was a great place for it to be. It had good energy. But they fed us. And so that was very expensive to pay for being there, pay for the rooms, and pay for all the meals for 4 weeks. And so after about 3 years, we ended up finding a place down near Santa Cruz, California, called the Ben Lomond Quaker Center. And it was the Quakers, it was near the town of Ben Lomond. And there we cooked all our own food. And so it was fabulous because the students started learning how to buy and cook food together. And it was the first 3 days, they would always sit arguing, no, everybody should be vegan. No, everybody should do their Ayurvedic type of dosha and figure out what meal to eat. No, everybody should eat this way. We should all, you know, and but so it was great. Fixing the food turned out to be a really major part of the whole month there. But that's where we, until this year when we had to do Zoom, the Zoom Heart program, for all these years since about 2004, for about 16 years, we've been down at Ben Lomond Quaker Center near Ben Lomond, California. And and the best thing, I think Wendy or Nina Stoyan was one of the people who worked at the University of Florida, and she and Wendy and I sort of have run the program. And either Wendy or Nina had this great idea early on, after we had been doing the planning for a few years, saying, why don't we let the students plan it? And so each year, five fourth-year students are picked who will be fourth-year students, and they do the entire planning. And all we do, Jack, is sort of answer questions or do stuff. Because after those first few years, a few of the Heart students had put together a book of what was good about Heart, what was bad about it, what we need to do. And so these last 15 years, pretty much 5 fourth-year medical students have done the entire planning for Heart. And I would just act as sort of a consultant. They would email me or call me sometimes saying, how about this? Or it would be something like this. Jack Travis got sort of bad reviews last year. Should we have him back this year? And I would say, yeah, he must have had a bad year. He's a really good person. Or I would go, no, I don't like him either. Don't have him back. And then they would say, well, how do we tell him not to come back? Because he's already contacted us 2 times that he wants to be sure and come back. And then I would say, I'll talk to him. And I would call him and talk to him and try and smooth it out but almost every faculty who would be invited to come and talk to the students wanted to come back, and they didn't get paid for it. They might get $100 for airfare or something, but every faculty who was there loved to be there because the 20 to 25 students were always their tribe. It's just the faculty loved the students, and the students loved each other. And so it's been one of the most exciting things I've ever been involved with, because if we have 25 students every year, now for 20 years, that's 500 people we've put out there who are, they're all doctors. We took MDs and DOs only from schools. We had 3 naturopaths. We did a couple NDs. But basically, it's 500 physicians coming into the system to really help change the system. So that's the Heart program.
And now the faculty, were they mainly drawn from the AHMA membership, or where did you pull your faculty from?
Yeah, that's a good question. We mainly people like Scott Shannon, who I knew. He was an AHMA president and came to the meetings, and I knew he had given good talks there. So, I got Scott to do it, and I got, pretty much AHMA people who I knew, or Wendy Klotz who knew, or Nina knew. We got them to be speakers, and then the 3 of us would always be speakers. And that's for the first number of years, one of us would take 2 weeks to be there. So there was one faculty there all the time. And then I would do 2 weeks, Wendy would do 1 week, and Nina would do 1 week. On those first weeks, Nina did most of the 2 weeks. Wendy and I did a week, and so that was the 4 weeks. And then so faculty like you, if you were one of the speakers, you would just come in maybe Wednesday night, stay there Wednesday night, be a speaker most of the day on Thursday, and then head home Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, or Friday. And we would have maybe 3 or 4 faculty come in a week for a day. And then Nina, Wendy, and I would be lecturing at least for a day or two, a day and a half. We would sort of be key faculty. So it was very easy to, maybe 3, 4 faculty a week, each of the 4 weeks, maybe have 15 one-day faculty. And then Wendy, Nina, and I would be the other faculty who would fill in when time was needed.
Now, have you retired from that and passed the baton? I'm trying to remember.
Last year, it was so clever I didn't know the pandemic was coming up this year, but I just decided I needed to pass the baton. So I called Wendy, and Wendy and Nina and I were still the key faculty, but we were the key during the week, but they didn't do much during the year with it. I helped all during the year of the students. And part of that was because I retired in 2004, and so I had the time. Nina and Wendy were still working, and so it's been fun. It was not, but somehow in that 2018 or 2019, I just decided that this was 2018. I thought, I'm only going to do 1 more year of this. It just is I I have a knowing when to quit practice, or I had a knowing that it was time to quit. And so I told them that 2019 was going to be my last year, and would Wendy take over? And she said, yes, she would. And so I talked to her a couple of times this year. I said, Wendy, I am so glad, because this year was so problematic with the pandemic, because that, and then the University of Texas, who was giving us credit. No, University of New Mexico is giving us credit for it. Well, they decided if it was a virtual Zoom type of thing, they couldn't give us credit for it. And so Wendy had to be dealing with the University of New Mexico higher ups to get it. And I'm going, oh, I'm so glad I'm not doing that, because I would say every year there was a problem. You know, one year it would be they only got 14 students instead of 20. The five planners didn't do a very good job of recruiting, and each student had to pay $1,000. And so if they were 6 students short, that was $6,000 we were short. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it was the strangest things, but it's like if you run anything, there's going to be problems. And so sometimes they had admitted students, but they let them in for cheaper. And so then we were short of money, and then we'd end up money. So twice I called Penny George. Have you heard of Penny George? Mm-hmm. She is a philanthropist here in town, and she's a friend of mine. I would call her and I'd say, Penny, we need $10,000 so badly this year for our heart program. And both times she came through and sort of filled in the missing money, because, you need money to pay the Ben Lomond Quaker Center. You need money to buy food all the time, and one thing we did do is usually try and pay for transportation, the plane trip for the planners. The reward for the planners was to not have to pay the $1,000 fee for that month. And then they'll pay a plane fare if they were on the East Coast. Yeah. So it took a certain amount of money.
So who's going to take your place then?
Wendy Kohatsu took my place.
She can do the whole thing. There'll just be 2 of them. You didn't find a third.
No.
Third wheel.
Wendy and Nina are still the 2 that are doing it. And we have a big enough backlog now of speakers that get superior ratings that it's pretty easy for the planners to figure out who to bring in for the next year. Great.
Now, University of New Mexico must be Dave Rakel and his crowd, or?
Right. The University of Wisconsin connected me up with Adam Reinflash, and Adam was on the faculty at the University of Wisconsin. Oh, I knew David Rakel as a friend. So I called David and said, the University of Florida has quit giving us credit. And so we need somebody. And David said, well, tell me about it. And David's such a good guy. So he said, sure, I'll take care of it, but I'm going to appoint Adam Reinflash to do it. Adam was just part of the family medicine faculty on the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so I said, fine. And so I said it would be important for Adam to come out there when I'm there in a week. And so Adam came out for a week. I stayed for 2 weeks, but Adam came out for a week. And we ended up getting just in love with each other. He was just great to be there for the week. And so that's what started. I talked to Wendy and Nina, and I said, it's so fun to have another faculty there. Why don't we always just have 2 faculty? Because we have enough other older speakers now who I think we could easily get faculty to just come for a week for no charge. They don't get paid, but they would be glad to come for a week. And so in these last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we've had usually 2 faculty there each week instead of just 1. Mm-hmm. Originally it was Nina for 2 weeks, Wendy for 1, and me for 1. And then I had Adam that time for that 2 weeks, and I said, I want to be with Adam or another faculty all the time. It was so much fun to not just be there alone.
Yeah, for sure. So there's one other arena that I remember that's quite unusual, and that was the meetings you instigated that have been going for, 30 years now? Started in someone's home in St. Paul, and the collective of various health practitioners. And tell us about that project.
Oh yeah, I feel really blessed about that. That came from my idea, finding my tribe with the Minnesota Holistic Medical Association. And Jack, I would go to the board meetings or our conferences, and I would come home like a balloon filled with air. And in about a week or two, the balloon had all leaked, the air had all leaked out.
Yep.
And like, again, my wife said, you know, I know a couple nurses up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I think you know a physical therapist who's gone to one of the holistic meetings. Why don't we pull a few people together and just meet up in Minneapolis, St. Paul? And so we met at the home of a nurse in St. Paul in 1989. Yeah, 1989. And there were 12 of us, I think. And, you know, the physical, I knew the physical therapist, a dentist. There was a dentist, John Laughlin, who had almost started the American Holistic Dental Association, which was like the American Holistic Medical Association. I don't think that exists anymore, but he was a holistic dentist. Anyway, so the 10 or 12 of us met at this nurse's home, and I just said, let's just go around and say what you're doing, who you are, what you're doing, and one thing in your practice that's really exciting you. And then so that's what we did. And a couple hours later, they wanted to meet every month, and I said, it's too hard for my wife and me to drive up here every month. Let's do it quarterly, and it has to be on a Saturday because that's really, I can't take time away from work. So we ended up meeting quarterly on a Saturday morning in 1989, and 31 years later, we're still meeting quarterly on Saturday morning, and the group has grown from 12 of us to now there's 900 of us. And we usually get between 100, you know, maybe 150 will come to our Saturday morning meeting. And so, yeah, and the mission of our group is to basically, number one, get to know each other. Number two is get to learn from each other. So we all, at our meetings, we have chiropractors and dentists and naturopaths and physical therapists and psychologists, everybody, you know, to give TED Talks on what they're doing. So, and then the third thing is to, since we know each other and know what they're doing, we then to be able to refer our patients appropriately. So you really feel comfortable referring to the right dentist you want to refer to, or the right acupuncturist, or the right Ayurvedic practitioner, or the right chiropractor, the one you've already met and known, you've heard talk. And so we've kept those same three goals and mission of the group, and we continue to meet, and yeah, it's been a really fun group. And we've now become part of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine. And so I said, 900 of our practitioners are not going to pay the dues or the fees you have to join the AIHM. And so we worked out that you don't have to, because I have no dues, I have no fees or anything. There's no cost to be part of our Minnesota organization. And so they worked out, Tabby Parker and Lucia Thornton, who run AIHM, worked out, that's okay, we'll just have you as a satellite clinic, a satellite of the AIHM. And so now all 900 members of our group are members of that group. And then you get more benefits if you join. You know, you get a discount for the conference and different things like that. But so that's been neat to be part of the national organization.
Have there been any other models of state, local, or branches that have formed like you did and hooked up with the national organization that you know of?
That's a really good question, and it's one of the key things that Tabby Parker and Lucia Thornton have done, is that they've really tried to spread out. AHMA, previously our group tried to spread out, and troops would spring up in Kansas City or Dallas or San Francisco, and then when that person forming it lost the energy, then the group would fold. Yeah. And so a lot of them have started and folded. But now with sort of these two women running AIHM, they've sort of really gotten a lot of towns and states to come up with programs. And so there's, I think the last I heard, there might have been 16 different, maybe even more, branches of AIHM, either in different states, like Minnesota is a state one, or like in California, San Francisco is a city one. But they're all now branches of AIHM. And so that's been exciting.
Didn't know about a San Francisco one. Tell me more if you know any, who and how many folks.
I don't know anything about it. No, I'm not. It's but it would be easy to find out by writing to AIHM, and and talking, and finding out which cities and which states have programs.
Yeah, interesting. Wow, Bill, this is it's so inspiring to talk to you and get this history and what you have contributed and continue to contribute. So I've about exhausted my questions. You got any further parting words of wisdom for the future generations that we hope will see this?
As you can tell, I could talk on and on, but I realize I have a dental appointment. I lost a crown, and I got a dental appointment at 3 o'clock today, which is in 25 minutes. So it's a perfect time to quit, even though I could go on and on, rattling on and on about a lot of things. But no, this has been great, Jack. It's been fun. You're a good questioner.
And any final words of wisdom to close with?
My final words might be, one, to really understand the difference between slow medicine and fast medicine, and to read the book by the woman who wrote that. I'm so sad I can't think of the name of it. Number two, my word would be that being in medicine is more of a spiritual and human and interdisciplinary and personal type of a practice than it is a medical practice.
Yeah.
And whether you're and that's easiest as a psychologist, psychiatrist, a family physician, internist, pediatrician. But even if you're a subspecialist, it's much more about the relationship and help and being with that person than it is about just necessarily making the right diagnosis and trying to correct it. And especially that's true now with slow medicine, with chronic disease rising exponentially. And I think that's been the beauty of the pandemic. That'd be my third thing. Look at this pandemic as like often when my patients would come in, illness and sickness was the best thing that could have happened to them because they needed to leave their job. They needed to get out of a marriage that was terrible. They needed to change their life. They were on the wrong path. And the body in its wisdom often tells us what to do. Now, I don't want to blame the victim because that's like, well, it's your fault. You have this, you did this. It's a fine line between blaming the victim, which is the negative part, and looking at it as what is your body and its wisdom trying to tell you. But that's the key to the practice of any interdisciplinary thing, is to trust the body, trust the person, and help, and with them go down the journey of figuring out. And my fourth thing would be, I think to help do that won't be MDs and NDs and DCs necessarily. It might be health coaches. And I see the day where, just like so many people now have a fitness coach and a lot of people have a financial advisor, I see everybody having a health coach. And I'm a big advocate of health coaches. That's the person you can call anytime and just talk about, I have a zit, what should I do about it? I have a headache, I have this. And good health coaches are going to be the sort of the GP of the past, where that's who you saw when you had a problem. Well, here you can run stuff by this problem, and good health coaches will be at one end, you need to go to the ER right now, and at the other end saying, let's talk about it and figure out what your body and its wisdom trying to tell you. So I'm putting in a big plug for health coaches.
Wonderful summary, Bill. Thank you again. This has been fantastic. We triumphed over technology, and go get that crown replaced. And thanks again.
Okay. Thanks, Jack.
Bye-bye.
Stay in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye.